Welcome to the Parable Arrows podcast, where we wrestle with story to seek deeper truth. We believe that engaging with the art of the world can help us discern more of what God, as the true artist, is trying to reveal in the beauty of his story. Join us as we discuss movies, ideas, and practice engaging with art, God's word, our thoughts, and each other. Fox and Tiana Paris. The reason we selected this is twofold. One, it's Black History Month. Two, it's a harder movie with some bigger themes, and we'll as usual not cover everything, but we hope that you're still building communities to think through these stories. So as a warning, this movie contains a lot of language, some sexual depiction, drug references, violence, which we'll talk about more in the audience section. But speaking of the audience, I'm one of your hosts, Femi, and I'm joined not only by my co-host, Josh Cook, but Josh, will you introduce our guest?
Ladies and gentlemen. I'm stealing that from KB. I love that when he does that. He's like, blessed and highly, he goes on this 10-minute rant. I'm joined by none other than Jac'Quon, who is from my men's small group, who is a fellow artist. He is passionate about storytelling and acting, specifically in like the theater and stuff like that. So he is super stoked, and I'm super excited to hear what you got to say today.
I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah,
it's going to be a great one.
Yeah. So this is Jac'Quon.
Mm-hmm.
Importance of story and faith for you.
Oh man. So a little bit about my backstory. I grew up here in Milwaukee. I went to primarily art schools. So if you know anything about Milwaukee, you know we got a series of art schools. So Roosevelt Middle School of the Arts, Milwaukee High School of the Arts. I did a year of school at UW Stevens Point, part of their Noel Arts program. So theater was my jam. It's what I love. But with that, I've had a lot of experience and exposure to different kinds of theater, whether it's, Shakespearean, different Italian plays that kind of come out, different method actings and things like that. So my exposure to that just grew. And I've always had a love for theater, primarily sitcom TV. I think that there's something special in my heart for sitcom. There's something about being able to tell a story about and watching a person grow through, season after season. So I definitely love that. Character development is a big portion of that. But I've performed in a number of plays, and that's just kind of like my history. But so I love everything that comes with film, theater, and media for sure. As far as my faith walk, I grew up in the church. It's just kind of like the theme music of my life. I'm the second oldest of 7. Big family. There's always fun going around. And not only did I grow up with my 6 siblings, but my dad and my aunt lived together as well for a large portion of my life. So I also grew up with my 4 cousins. So like big house, big family, and like people around all the time. So I had a big, fun social background. Me and Josh, we actually met. Right now, I go to we both go to Epicos, and we actually met at our men's group. And man, he just has a way with exploring the word that I just found so fascinating. And, my wife and I were on a journey of just trying to gain more relationships when it comes to like faith-based couples and people that believe in the word, and just kind of surrounding ourselves with, couples that are like-minded. And we had the opportunity to sit down with him and his wife and kind of learn a little bit more about them. And they learned a little bit more about us. And, there's truly a friendship that's developing there. So that's been great. So
yeah, man.
And that's what led us here.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it was literally over dinner at Cafe Hollander, and I was like, movies, and you were like, yes. And I was like, do you want to be on my podcast? Like, yes. So here we are.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, for the audience, welcome to Jac'Quon, and we want to say we have this breakdown that we're going to walk through. For those of you who listened before, it's going to be the summary, message, who we think the audience is. We'll rethink some things and then touch on some theology and how we as people of faith, how it helps us reminds us of Scripture and what goes through. So we'll get through that. All right, let's get into it. So, summary first. So, spoiler alert, as usual. Fontain is our main character. He's a drug dealer in the Glen, doing the same thing, and most daily. He lives with a shut-in mom and a memory of a brother who died when confronting an associate who's a pimp named Slick, not a pimp named Slickback, for some money. He is shot by a rebel drug dealer. The next day, he wakes up to the shock of others who thought he was dead, and he investigates because he saw a man scooped up by a van and taken to a house. And they learn there's this larger experiment that's going on that's trying to control black people through music, through food, through drinks. And what's worse, they have trigger words to control them. So eventually, knowing the truth, Fontaine starts to give up, but realizes that his shut-in mom is just a recording of her. And so they break into the lab, and the clones run into the original Fontaine, and he starts to talk about his work with the shady organization to control black people and assimilate many populations into one sort of master population over generations. And they do long-term experiments on this. And I stopped writing because I know the rest of this, but they kill old Fontaine and then break all these clones out, and chaos sort of ensues. And some people with another clone go like, man, looking at the news, is that you, Tyrone? And the movie sort of ends. So that's the movie we're talking about. Hang on. It's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah,
all right,
dude.
Let's go ahead and get into the message. All right, the message of They Cloned Tyrone. Jac'Quon, I'll start with you. Like, what did you think sort of the message of the movie was?
Oh man, this it's pretty compelling to just think about this idea that we don't necessarily have control over ourselves. I think that was a big theme in the film. This idea that, you know, there's always someone else pulling the strings, and that the things that you think you're doing for yourself, whether you enjoy them or not, are actually being controlled by other people. And so I'd say the big message was really having the ability to make your own choices, and the freedom of choice is a big thing and worth creating havoc over, apparently. So it was a shock to everyone to find out that everything that they thought was real and the choices that they were making wasn't really their choice at all. So it was pretty interesting there.
Yeah, Josh, what about you?
Yeah, it's very similar because I had, I think a lot of our conversation is going to focus on like freedom of choice, which I think that's going to be a lot of fun to dive into. But this is a theme of some of my favorite stories. Like I think of like Attack on Titan, Watchmen, that there's like peace that is authentic, and then there's peace that is brought out by a means of like force or coercion or deception. And my takeaway is that peace by force isn't peace, let alone a lasting peace. So, you know, we have that, interestingly enough, all these rivals in the Glen end up coming together to face down this evil organization because they're like, wait a second, they're in control of everything. We're not really actually getting to make our own choices. And so for a while, the peace was working. You know, the drugged out food, the hypnotic music, the scenes, all of it was working until it didn't. And then when it didn't, people were mad, and they were really mad, and they were mad enough to, you know, basically like storm the lab and, you know, cause a bunch of problems. So I think, yeah, just that idea of like, I think there's a lot of people who think that peace by any means is like fine, and that's like good peace. But I think I'm wrestling with that idea of like, what does it actually take to have like true, authentic, lasting peace versus just like, you know, peace at the end of a gun, or, you know, peace at the threat of violence, or like a worse punishment.
I would completely agree with both of you that it was around this idea of freedom is more important than your survival. It's worth giving up everything for, and having chaos, havoc. I think is the word you used, Jac'Quon. Like havoc's okay as long as you have freedom. And before I transition, I got to talk to one of our friends, Brandon and Anicia Egger, down in Texas, and love them and their support. They said one of the things they were thinking of also is just the sacrifice of the character that people thought was not worthy of being cloned at one point in Yo-Yo, and how Yo-Yo didn't give up. And I just love Tiana Paris as well. So like that was cool to see. But going from those messages around freedom, what do we think about? Do we agree with the way the movie couches that idea of freedom? Do we think that the movie was right in the way it portrayed it, or there was a little bit of being contrived in that? What were some of your thoughts? Again, we'll start with you, Jac'Quon.
So I think that like the idea of chaos is probably not the best thing, but there's definitely something to be said about us being able to have the freedom to decide what our choices are going to be. So I think the message in and of itself that's embedded in the story about fighting for your ability to have the freedom to choose, I think that's a good thing worth fighting for. But I think in the end, we need to think more long term about how to better obtain that and how to utilize it. So, in the end, they stormed all the labs and destroyed everything. And in the end, you end up destroying your communities, and it leaves you with really what? And you're fighting this fight to gain this ability or what does it really mean in the end if you don't really have anything else to kind of like hold on to? So there's something to be said about ensuring that you're protecting not only the value of having freedom, but also what it means to have that responsibility that comes along with it.
Yeah, like freedom for what?
Yes.
Like if I'm going to be free, like am I free to just, go crazy and do whatever?
Wreak havoc?
Yeah, am I free to steal? And yeah, I love that. No, kind of following up with what Jac'Quon said, I think something that I've been really struggling with, because I've been teaching church history to my 10th graders this year, and one of our figures we looked at is Augustine, and Augustine is like one of the writers about this idea of like the just war theory, where it's like, well, like what is when is a fight just? Like when is a war just? Where it's like, oh man, these guys out here, they're that can't be. we have to go head out. And I think I'm watching, and maybe it's just like in the last like 10 years of American culture, it just feels like we want everything to be a just war. And so we're way too willing to fight with fists and guns and harsh words and violence and all sorts of other stuff before looking into other solutions. So I do still believe, like, I just think of, the atrocities that could have been committed worldwide if like World War II had gone differently. But I also think of all the wars that, kind of to your first point, how many things are a little bit like, well, we're actually fighting this war because this person wants this thing. And none of us really have any bearing on it, or none of us really get that thing, but this person wants it, or this group wants it. And so, yeah, so I think just that idea of like, I agree totally with the balance of like, I think God clearly has designed our world to be a world of choice. And so removing the ability for people to choose is not healthy, spiritually, in our human nature, whatever. But I do think it's interesting that the movie ends with clone Fontain killing original Fontain, that they're like, there's like a death involved. And so there's I don't know, I feel kind of stuck. Like, I don't know if I agree or disagree, because in old Fontain dying, he can't, like, he's gone, like, right? Like, so but he was a puppet of a bigger thing, or he was engaging with a bigger thing. So I think that's a hard idea for me to wrestle with, is like, even biblically, like, there were nations that God had the Israelites wipe out because their ideas and their ways of doing things were so heinous, from child sacrifice and all that stuff, that he was like, they just need to be obliterated. And they've had chances to turn, and they've had chances to repent, and they will not. And so there was kind of like a judgment coming through Israel. But I think, again, it's like, where's our heart posture as, as individuals? Where are we? Are we just like itching to fight, kind of? So I feel stuck. I don't know. So Femi, save me from my cycle of thoughts right now.
I don't know as well. I think that my initial reaction, and the thing that I wrote, is freedom is as important. Like you said, God made the world in a way where one of the only things we have to do is to choose, where we really have the ability, even in tragedy or triumph, to say, how am I going to look at this? I'm going to look in triumph and see that I got second place and be upset because I didn't get first, or I'm going to get second place and I'm going to choose to be so happy that I'm the second best at this thing at this point in time. And I feel that is something we need to make sure we couch in a priority list of where does freedom fall in terms of other really important values. Otherwise, we're going to get to a point where, like both of you mentioned, the freedom to do, period, without an actual question about what the freedom to do is, becomes the main driver behind people's action and righteous outrage of, you're taking away my freedom. You're taking away my freedom. We're taking away your ability to do things that are not conducive to what we think a flourishing society that has areas of people developing well and creating well and challenging well and listening well. If things don't move towards some type of vision of what peace looks like in a way that we can agree, that actually does really look more peaceful than the alternative, which gets part of the way there and doesn't finish. We have to couch that freedom in something. I appreciated the message of freedom when it comes to overturning a group of lying, conniving, backstabbing, manipulating people. But you have to have something on the other side, or you get what we did get at the end of the movie of complete chaos, unclear messages, a lot of reaction. And every time that happens, there's no one who anybody trusts now to settle it and bring under control. So as Christians, we need to think about that with all the messages around overturning unjust authority. It's, where do we now find new authority? And are we prepared to do that in a way that's really helpful for everyone to discuss and think about? In a democratic society, also for people to be able to put their voice in and speak to. So that's where I, summing up a lot of my thoughts as quickly as I can, ended up on the message of, there has to be something after freedom, that freedom is valuable to produce. And that, I think, is all what we're talking about, the three of us are talking about, of freedom for what? Go listen to episode 1 of the Purple Arrows podcast as well.
The very first. Yep.
What I find actually really interesting, this is something that just kind of popped in my spirit while you were talking. So you think about the story of the Israelites in Ephesians, and they were rescued out of Egypt, and there was casualties in the midst of that. There are a lot of people that died in order to create freedom for the Israelites. But on the other end of that, they had to learn how to navigate that freedom by submitting to God and learning who he was and operating in a newfound principle. And it was all based on choice. They had choices that they had to make the entire time on their journey, but ultimately they were freed from their oppressors, or the people that held them prisoner, if you will, which is very similar to this story in a way, but tying it into what happens next. You have an authority that you have to, submit that freedom to in order to keep chaos from taking over. And there were many times that the Israelites didn't do what they should have done, where they were starting to lose sight on what their purpose was and who God was and all the things that he's done for them as well. So I find it interesting that like there's that like dynamic of what happens after the chaos has settled. And I think they Cloned Tyrone kind of talks about, what happened during the chaos, but not necessarily what happens afterwards. So they created a lot of chaos, but there was no distinguished place of like rest afterwards. There was no sense of direction on where they were going afterwards. But I think that that's where the story can really, where conversations can begin to take place as far as what happens after. We understand and appreciate freedom, but it has to submit to something.
Godle or golden calf, one of the two. One of the two. I know my choice.
And I know we can talk about more about the messages. We'll talk a little about that in some of the questions we're going to. So let's hit up the audience and then get into the rethink. Okay, so audience, who should watch this movie? Josh, let's start with you this time. Who do you think should watch this?
To keep it snappy in a agreed friend circle that this is a great movie, kind of like we're talking about like freedom and especially I think that's such a biblical idea of like how do we maintain relationship when maybe I don't feel free to do something, but then you feel free to do something, and how do I not judge you for that freedom that you feel like you have? For sake, we should give a freedom tally this way. We used to like 800 times, but yeah, just the idea of choices. And so I think amongst friends, this could actually be like a really great tool where, if people feel in tension or even just trying to understand each other, why do you feel like you're okay to do this? And like, why do you feel not okay to do this? Stuff like that. And then same thing evangelistically, I think that is probably one of the hallmarks of secular culture right now is don't tell me what to do. I want to choose. And we're like, yes, like God 100% agrees with that. However, he would argue that some of the things that you want to choose are not what you should be choosing because it's not going to lead to your flourishing and your good. So I think, yeah, just like this is a great movie to pave a way. But families with kids, unless those kids are like 18, maybe not. I would save this for when they're back visiting from college or something. That's that kind of movie.
Jac'Quon, how about you?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I don't think that this is for a young audience. This is definitely something that it requires a level of thoughtfulness and intention if you're going to watch this. And I think there's a level of even spiritual growth that's necessary, not to get sucked into certain concepts that are depicted in the movie. But overall, I think that it's a great conversation piece, talking about different things and around freedom and just your ability to have the right to choose. It's really compelling in that right, but I would say that it's an open book. I think no matter where you come from as far as your background, I think that whether you are exposed to these kind of depictions or not, I think that there are character relatabilities that everyone can have, and that's worth watching and really kind of taking an approach to enjoy it. So yeah,
I would say the same. Agree with both of you that families with kids, unless you have a intentionality about it, it's not really for them. There's a lot of language, especially if you are, without getting too much into the racial context of the movie yet, if you're a white family, you might not feel comfortable watching this movie because there's a lot of uses of the N-word. There's a lot of uses of just general expletives, and it's a mostly Black audience, and that could potentially portray Black people in a way you don't want to portray to your kids. And so if you're from a community like that, it might be something you don't want to perpetuate as far as an expectation. So be careful with kids. Same thing with friends and friend bondage. I think friend bondage is a very loaded term, but all I meant to put that in the notes is what Josh alluded to earlier of sometimes my friends say no to helping me move because they have the ability to exercise a choice to not do that. And I need to be okay with it. It doesn't mean they're like not my friend because they didn't show up for me. So thinking about what is choice and freedom in that aspect of the relationship, when it's not covenantal, as we would say as Christians too, and what does covenantal friendship look like? Those are things that are things we're all trying to navigate, especially as young and getting older adults. How do you form friends, especially when, like Jac'Quon, you mentioned earlier, when you're married and you're trying to do that as a couple with another couple and the families and trying to figure out who you mesh with, to make it easy and to make it consistent. And then evangelistically, I think it's a real common question if you have people who are willing to watch it of what their freedom is, especially freedom in Christ versus not. So I think that gets us right into some of our top questions. So this is one that we looked at in terms of freedom and resolution. All of us have mentioned resolution. So the first question I had, and I'll sum it up to save a little time, are when there are problems, what does this movie tell us is the suggested path to resolution? There's a couple of examples as you're thinking of an answer. Fontaine deals drugs for money because he needs the money. Yo-Yo wants to move, but she's trying to save up money and is still indebted to this pimp. Isaac kills Fontaine for trying to take money from him. The community eats poorly, has sex, does drugs to stop their boredom. Old Fontaine controls a population to develop assimilation because of his sadness over losing his brother. Fontaine killed the founders of a bad system to stop it, but with no plan after. So what does this movie tell us about paths of resolution?
The movie,
go first.
Yeah, I was like, the movie says, I want to be clear. The movie says, get it however means necessary. I think that's like the message that I would say comes out of that. All of those things, what they have in common is people doing what they feel they have to do in order to survive and just enjoy whatever level of peace that they can conjure up in their life. And I think that, there's a lot of relatability to that in our common world. But I would say that the message of that is get it how you can, enjoy yourself, enjoy your life.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking through one of the solutions being like, don't do anything, like if the monster is so big and so controlling and so overwhelming, like what's the point in even putting up a fight? We're all going to get stomped. So let's just, do whatever, have our fun, live our life, enjoy what we can. And then on the other side, I feel like there is a fierceness that can come out from realizing like, wait a second, but this monster needs to go and it's bad. And you're like, yes, but then it's not really, it's just removing, like Friedrich Nietzsche's famous quote, God is dead and we have killed him. Everyone loves that from a secular perspective because they're like, yeah, get rid of God. He's a punk and, we don't want him ruling everything. But for Nietzsche, the context that I understand is he said that statement out of fear because people were removing God from all these cultural pillars. And so he was like, okay, fine, you can do that. And I'm personally in favor of it, but what are you going to put there instead? And then he was saying that line right on the cusp of World War II, and the horror that happened there. So I don't know. It's hard because I don't feel like the movie ever really offers a different solution. The solution is just get rid of the bad. Like, but that's to the extent that it goes. Like, get rid of the thing, get rid of the cancer, get rid of the thing that everyone is being impacted by, and and then we're gonna cut to the credits.
Basically.
Yeah, I would agree. It's by any means necessary, which flows right into the next question that I had, which is why doesn't Nixon or the older version of Fontaine just use the Olympia Black to assimilate people? Why do they decide to only sort of brainwash people? And it comes to the second part of that question. And what does it say that people thought all the things they were doing were their fully free choices?
I would say it's more along the line. I think about capitalism, man. Like just people just trying to capitalize on everything. You got these group of people that you can, in essence, manipulate and brainwash in order to create this cash cow. But at the same time, you have unlimited resources to experimentation. So one of the things that old Fontaine actually says is that in the movie is that it wasn't his ideal choice, but he had to make a deal with the devil in order to do what he set out to do individually. So I think in that there was a capital gain, and then there was like a personal approach, and one gets washed out over the other, and you're just left with the mess of these people are being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Dude, when you say capitalism, I was like, because I was kind of wrestling through this question. I was like,
it's always capitalism.
We're going to get blacklisted. No, I think because like, oh man, here we go. Buckle up, gents. This is all the thoughts coming out on that. So something I've been wrestling with a lot recently is my background is in marketing. So my very first job out of school was marketing. And maybe it was just my personality, but there just got to a point where I just felt grimy. Like I was sitting in meetings, and we'd have this product that we were trying to sell that was not eco-friendly. It was terrible for the environment. It was super cheap. Mm-hmm. And our solution was, instead of, well, you know what? Maybe we're moving into a world where this product isn't needed anymore, and we need to just let that go and push these out. It was like, well, how do we make people buy more? And I just remember that being like, oh, like that thought process just destroyed me. And I think it was like that was like the start of the slow decay where I was like, oh, we're only doing anything for money. Mm-hmm. Like we're not actually making decisions for what's best for the world, what's best for human flourishing, what's best for the environment, what's best for our customers. We're doing whatever is going to make us the most profit. Well, oddly enough, none of that profit goes to me. that all goes to someone else, somewhere else in the company. I think there's with capitalism, I think, again, there's like something, I love the fact that if I work really hard and I create something valuable for the world, that I can be rewarded for that. But I think a really big danger that I think people can buy into in a capitalist system is then anything anyone does within this capitalist system, it's like, oh, well, the market wins. But everyone's fighting for a market that doesn't need to be as inundated with however much stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like why do I need 30 dishwashing soaps? Why do I need, not to say that I want like one, I don't want Amazon brand stuff. Like, good Lord, don't get me down that track. But I think there's like a balance that I think especially in American culture, it just feels like we're on the extreme end of like competing over nonsense, like competing over
taping our mouths shut to sleep better.
Yeah, it's like stuff like that where we're like, oh man, because if you breathe through your nose, your jaw, and it's gonna, like, oh, buy my jaw thing that's gonna do it for you for $20, or like, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's my thing that's made from dirt, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, why are there 800 things that do the same thing from 8 different people? It's just like, yeah, it's just, I think when I think of Nixon and Old Fontain, to me, to answer your question more directly, Femi, it's because that's not what their goal was. Like, they didn't care. It wasn't actually to make a better world. It was just to, kind of quiet a community in a really like oppressive way. That was the goal. It wasn't actually to make their lives better. It wasn't actually to, because like, think of it this way. I mean, if we're going to get really creative with it, okay, so you have this ability. I'm not saying that this is what the writer should have done, but like playing the thought experiment. Let's say Nixon and Old Fontaine, they have this truth control serum, and they're like, you know what? We're going to take this serum and we're going to turn this drug dealer into someone who's obsessed with knowledge and obsessed with passing that knowledge on to other people. And we see that Fontaine has Junebug, who's kind of like his little buddy, kind of reminds him of his younger brother. He passes that on to Junebug, and then Junebug passes on, and we see like, wow, like everyone is flourishing and there's this spread, but that wasn't the goal. Like, the goal wasn't everyone to do well. It was for a few to do well. And I think that makes me feel icky. Just thinking about that.
And to kind of expand on that, what I didn't catch this the first time I watched it, but I was watching it for this podcast here. I didn't recognize that Fontaine wasn't real and he was only implemented into the community in order to create like damage control. So he was a distraction. Him, the pastor, the pimp, like they were all meant in order to contain and like control the people that really lived there. So to your point, this was never about improving anything. It was about managing a system of keeping people in line.
Yeah.
You know, and these were necessary elements in order to maintain the facade that this is like freedom of choice, that you're choosing to be in these environments. And then they're just flooding the community with all of these like, you know, grossly like not healthy things just so that they could make a quick buck. So yeah, it's crazy. Capitalism, man.
Yeah, we're in a sermon series right now on just technology and how it impacts us and how it impacts how we think. I think that when you believe that you're making a choice, it's the most dangerous type of manipulation, right? It's what Inception is about, which maybe we should do Inception sometime soon. Inception is literally about how can I make somebody think the idea that I had was their idea. Influence, persuasion, all of these things are not bad ideas. They're capitalistic ideas. But here's the rub, right? The next question I had was about building a coalition and how Fontaine has to convince Isaac and all these other people to join him to overthrow. For us as Christians, we're trying to convince people to make their own free choice, right? And we're using things to try to say, hey, this is your choice to make. People will sometimes come back at us and go, you're just trying to make it seem like I'm making this choice. You're trying to make it seem like that. Or there's no such thing as what I consider free will when there's predestination or all these other things that people will complain about. So I think we have to process what does it mean for someone to have a fully free choice, and what does influence and persuasion deal with that? So that question, again, going back to the movie, is how do we convince people to believe us? What elements help with proving an idea is more than just one person's belief in the idea? What are those things that you think are really either the movie pulls out or that you think of?
Josh, I'm gonna let you take that one first.
You live it. It's as we're talking, it's clicking. Like, man, it's almost like, whoa, it's so simple, but you know, like when Jesus was walking around saying that the kingdom of heaven is here now. Like, yes, he preached, yes, he taught, yes, he did all the parables and all that stuff, but he was living out the life that he said was going to be the best for their flourishing. And he said no to the temptations that promised him the ultimates of human flourishing, you know, with Satan being like, turn things into bread and, you know, be a traveling magician and make money, or like, you know, just bow to me and I'll give you control over all these kingdoms and all this stuff. And we're reading Jesus and the Disinherited right now by Howard Thurman in my 10th grade, which is one of my all-time favorite books. In one of the chapters, it talks about one of the things that we need to be very careful of as Christians is to observe that Jesus in his ministry had full ability to use political power and manipulation and just like weaseling into the political system to make the changes that he wanted to make, but he didn't. And the fact that he didn't should be very, very, very poignant to us, that he was never interested in changing anything through politics. And I think, man, dude, like I'm just thinking of how many conversations I've had with people where they're just disillusioned with Christianity because it's all concepts, or it's just a belief system, or it's, you know, like there's nothing to it. Like it's just what you say you believe, or, you know, where you go on Sundays, versus, wow, I heard that you went through this really hard thing as a family and this is how you handled it. Or your neighbor went through this really hard thing and this is how you handled it. Or I see you and I hear you talking about, yeah, we like watch movies, but we only watch one a day or like one a week. And, you know, usually we try to do free time doing this. And it's like, and your kids are like nice to you and they like you. And and they're nice to other people and respectful. You know, like, I just don't think people have always lived out Christ's teachings in a way that made them more loud than the words that they were saying. And so I think it was a lot. It's just been talk. And I think, to me, like, going back to Fontain, that's one of the things that, you know, with him going to Isaac, that I think was one of the most interesting and powerful moments in the movie, is he was like, the only way that we can pull this off is if I actually, like, tell the truth and surrender to the fact that this might not go the way I'm thinking it's going to go, but we need his help, and we're going to go to this other guy and, like, get him involved in this. And that's one of the things that turns the tide, is his willingness to, like, go to someone else to live it. Like, oh, Fontaine, he's just talking a bunch of nonsense about an underground lab, you know, and he sent some weird slick pimp guy, like, you know, to tell me. And it's like, no, he showed up. Fontaine showed up himself. So I think there's a big difference between word and action. And I think we've been really obsessed with words, and not so much the action side of it.
Jac'Quon, let me know if you have something right on the tip of your tongue. Otherwise, I have something.
I do.
Go ahead.
So one, I found it very interesting. I think that this is something that we should probably talk more about in general, is the humanity of Christ. I think oftentimes we look at him as our God, which he is, but also, like, I mean, he was tired sometimes, and he was like, he lived on this earth, and, you know, he craved stuff. Like, what's Jesus' favorite food? Like, that's interesting. I never even thought about that. Like, you make him
Chick-fil-A. That's the right answer.
Chick-fil-A. But with that being said, I think it's very true that we have to live out that faith and allow our life in the way that we experience the world, as we go through things similar to the world, but with a different attitude, allow that to capture the attention of why our life is so different. And then that opens the door for us to be able to have that conversation. And I think in the context of this movie and what you were saying, Fontaine was just willing to be vulnerable enough and accept the reality of what could have happened with him telling the truth, to the point to where he was able to gain the trust of everyone within the community. Because you think about what he's saying, that's like a very bizarre thing. You know, you're telling me that there are people underneath the city that are mind controlling us, like what? And you want me to shoot you, and somehow we're going to figure out a plan to take back our city. That's a strange thing to ask anybody to do, but he was fully committed to that idea, and the fact that he was committed to it allowed him to gain the trust of the community in order for them to follow them. Because up until they made it down underneath the city, no one actually knew what was going on. So I think that there's a lot to be said about our ability to walk out our faith unequivocally around other people, and for people to see how that shows up in the world can be enough for us to be able to have the conversations. And that in and of itself can change or influence someone's choice. But you can't manipulate people into believing anything.
Yeah. Real quick, sorry, Femi, I'm going to jump back. You said the humanness of Christ, and that was, we watched a small documentary on Thurman's life, and an observation he made is that the Black Christians during the Civil Rights era were talking more about Jesus, the man, and white Christians were talking about the Christ. And he was saying how Jesus, the man, is tangible. He did stuff. He lived. He made choices and decisions and was in community. The Christ is kind of this, like, theologically abstract concept that's important, but, like, how do I form my human life and experience after a theologically abstract concept?
Yes.
Versus, no, go heal the sick, go love the poor, go serve the widow. You know, like, that's, like, very easy. Like, just go do those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. The only addition I have to both of those things around what it looks to live it out is two words. And audience, think about this, comment to us. it is the humility that's coming from a vulnerability. You have to put yourself in a vulnerable position, and it has to cost you. So a vulnerable position at cost. So an example in modern day is there are a lot of great biblical principles around money. There's a lot of great biblical principles around career, great biblical principles around marriage and family. A lot of those have come from what the Bible says about family, and they now are sort of commonplace terms we'll see and hear around how to have a good marriage and how to raise your kids peacefully and not yell at them and still have discipline and make sure you're solving problems for your boss and have a servant. There's so many people that have servant leadership in their leadership programs, right? But when they get more, especially like the word love, get more watered down, there has to be something else seen for people to know, oh, you're not trying to get rich quick. You're not trying to get rich as fast as possible to have 3 generations of your family never worry about money. You're not trying to avoid the IRS at all costs. That's a cost to you. You're exposing yourself. You're vulnerable. You're not making the most you can make. And that financial thing, we could go down a huge tangent with just the finance piece, right?
Yes, we can.
So I think that for me, one of the takeaways as we're talking is remembering that what will look like I'm really following and what I believe is my vulnerability, how exposed I'm going to be at times, and it's going to cost me something. It's going to cost me, because then people go, okay, he must really believe that, right? Isaac didn't have to be faithful to Fontain. Fontain put himself in that position. So, okay, going on. The last question I have, and then we have some bonus questions we'll stay after closing. Yo-Yo, one of my favorite characters, was becoming one of my favorite actresses, Teyonah Parris. She keeps saying she's going to leave, but she doesn't leave. We don't know why she doesn't leave yet. And she becomes this pivotal character in the entire course of them being able to escape out of this entire sort of dystopian situation. So how do we know and discern if our comfort is holding us back or not? What are some ways you track yourself to make sure you're still growing?
I'll take it.
Go ahead.
Putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. This is something that I can currently attest to as someone that just recently switched careers. I worked in the auto industry for close to 7 years, 4 of those being in sales, and the last 2.5, 3 were in finance. And I did okay. Like I wasn't the best, but I did okay. And I was, pretty financially set up. However, I had to make a pretty drastic choice in, changing my career. And it's so uncomfortable being in this position right now, and not necessarily just because I'm learning new things, but I'm also learning new things about myself, things that I thought I had all together that I don't, and things that I have to grow, like areas of growth that I have to kind of put myself in. I think oftentimes we have to ensure that we are not settled so comfortably in our position that we become kind of like this routine, like we get into this routine. If you can check into your life in multiple areas and there isn't a single space where you feel uncomfortable, then I would challenge you to move somewhere, move the needle, even just a little bit. That's a good indicator that maybe you're not growing, is if in every area of your life you feel settled, because there's always something that we can improve on, whether it's mentally, it's financially, it's physically. I mean, like how many of us struggle with, whatever our health goals would be. There should always be something that we're doing in our life that makes us uncomfortable. And I think with Yo-Yo specifically, she struggled with, the change. What I found interesting too is that she's a very smart person. Mm-hmm. Like she had all of those books and, she wanted to, like, there was like a little blurb in the movie where she was talking about like, well, like, moving to New York and, writing in the New York Times. And like she had visions and dreams for herself. But I think that oftentimes we get so settled into the mundane and the things that we are currently, the positions that we're currently in, that we don't make it the change. And I think for her, that's what it was. It was just such a hard shift to put herself in an uncomfortable position, to go from being, we'll call it an entrepreneur, to like working and actually utilizing some of her skills means that she probably has to, face some realities, whether she finished school or whatever the case is. And those are some hard hurdles to overcome. So, in short, just always look for an opportunity to stretch yourself. And that's how you know you're growing.
Yeah. Adding on to that, stability is not the same thing as comfort. That is something that I have been learning recently that has been really challenging. Is comfort is a consumeristic virtue. It is not a healthy, godly. It's not a fruit of the spirit by any means. And I think the reason that distinction is important, that comfort is not stability, is we should desire stability. God desires stability. He wanted his people to be stable. He wanted them to have a flourishing community. He wanted to have systems and structures in place to like have things go and, to like keep things moving and to make sure everyone's taken care of. But that is not the same thing as being comfortable. And so I think comfort should be more of a dirty word than it is. We find out if we're not comfortable when something makes us uncomfortable. How do we respond to it? For me, dealing with different, mental health things or whatever, discomfort is like, I love being comfortable because it's the only time I feel sane. And so when I'm uncomfortable, it is very difficult, but I've had to learn in the midst of some of those things that being uncomfortable are some of the most important times for me to understand other people, to understand the world better, to understand that I don't have everything figured out, to understand that things are more complicated than they would seem, and to maybe, kind of like you were saying, Jac'Quon, where I might be falling short of things that God would be calling me to because I've been protecting myself from, things that I could be experiencing. So
yeah, I'm in that similar season of trying to make sure that I'm working on a new project. It's very complex, different levels of complexity than the things that I feel comfortable with. And I think that to add on to what both of you are saying, a good marker for me is my gut reaction when I feel uncomfortable. If it's to immediately start doing something, sometimes I need to sit in it for a lot longer than I want to. And when I want to hold on to something right now that's going on for what I believe is a good time or going well, realizing that God might be saying, no, you need to like get up now. You need to move. That's a real hard challenge, but I think that hopefully that's helpful to the listeners as you're thinking about this, and also looking at other people in your life. Again, this is about relating to God through story, relating to other people, looking at other people in your life and realize that they might be struggling with knowing that they need to sit and wait and be still for a second and methodically work through something instead of just wanting to run to the next thing. And there's some people who are sat still and they look to themselves like they're okay, but there's a lot of gifts there. There's a lot of things and fruit there that need to be harvested and pruned, and it will make them uncomfortable and they need to move a little bit. So just think about that and care. And as you're thinking about those people and caring for those people, again, we have a couple more questions we're going to cover after this main episode. So look out for that. But we're going to jump into our theology section. All right. So as Christians, it's not just our thoughts, but comparing our thoughts and stories that are supposed to communicate truth, where we lean on the Bible and we lean on scripture because it's supposed to be the foundation of where we're comparing all these things to. So the first couple are from you guys, so I'll let you reference some of these passages and we can chat about them really briefly.
Yeah, so I put these two down. So Daniel 1, that's an active story of, the book of Daniel, when we talk about like changing a culture, is like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in a system that was not fair, and they were being ruled by a king that was very borderline crazy and doing a whole bunch of crazy nonsense.
A wild
and like
beast.
literally went crazy. Yeah. And so in the very first chapter, though, there's a situation where Daniel and his friends are faced with, here's all these like fatty foods to like, make you slow and whatever. I bet you it was like McDonald's and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was like, hey guys, and they were like, no, you know what? We're not gonna do that. And the guard was literally like, okay, but if you don't eat this food, like I might get killed for it. Like I might get in trouble. And Daniel's so confident in what is the right decision. He's like, listen, we'll put our backs on the line. Like you give us what we're asking for, these healthier foods, and we'll see who's better at the end of the week or whatever. And then lo and behold, they prove the results to the point that everyone else gets new food. And so I think sometimes being in a situation where there is like a system that wants us to do something unhealthy, the easy solution is just to go along with it, or to like be really violent and reactive to the system to like make it so that it's not trying to do that thing, versus being like, okay, you can tell me that that's good, but I'm going to show you that that's not good. So that's Daniel 1. And then Daniel 2, I think,
Daniel 2, Judges 2.
although that Judges 2, sorry. Judges 2 is, although a lot of they cloned Tyrone, we had the backstory of the manipulation and the chemical deception and stuff like that. Judges 2, though, one of the reasons that Israel is quoted for continuing to turn against God is their pleasures and all the things that they keep going to instead of God, to like, like feel good or whatever. And that is what keeps causing all these oppressive nations to come out of the woodwork and cause all this havoc to them. So I think sometimes, yes, in the chaos of our world, there are situations and there are people who sadly rise up to do awful things because that's just what they are going to do. But I think more often than not, there are ways that we are responsible for the things that are happening in our life. So Judges 2 is just kind of like to challenge you, like, are you living in that comfort, not being willing to shake out cycle, and are some hard things happening that God's been trying to use to cultivate kind of that like loving shoulder shake to help you see things differently.
Yeah, that's awesome. The 3 that I added were one was Acts 5:25-32, and this is a story of the apostles being accused of overturning the normal city structures by preaching the gospel. And they're like, it's against the law for you to do this. You're going to put the blood of men's hands on our conscience because you're preaching this gospel, which is getting them in trouble. And the apostles just go, who are we supposed to obey? You or God? Like, what do you want me to do? If it's between the two, like, that's not a choice for me. I know who I'm going to obey. I think we need to be very aware and careful of that. There's a lot more I could say about that, but the 2 that follow right after, Romans 12:17-21, the priority to live at peace with all people as far as it depends on us. As far as it depends on us, I feel like I should put in Tobe Nwigwe's song, Try Jesus, Don't Try Me. Because it is, as far as it depends on me, I'm going to try to act in peace. And I will not throw hands, but there is a defense of self and a defense of others around me and protection of those that I will look to. But it's my priority to live at peace, as Paul's writing to the Romans. And then Jeremiah 29:5-7. No, not verse 11. Verses 5-7. Not 11.
There you go.
This is a chaotic life for the exiles, and God gives them instructions on how to flourish in the chaos. And I think that we need to remember we are to flourish in the chaos. And it's really some of the most basic things he's talking about when we're looking at that flourishing. It says, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry, have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, so they may too and have sons and daughters, increase in number, do not decrease, and seek the prosperity of the city to which I have called you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper. I don't know of a more basic thing to overturn a structure that he tells them as they are exiled from their home. And it's really convicting that those basic things are the things he's saying. Do this well. Like, that'll That's what I'm asking you to do in the chaos, which is like a bare minimum plan when we're afraid of COVID or wars or recessions. Remember that we are still to build houses and or households with families and produce people who think well to do the same. So those are some of the things that, again, when you take these passages first and try to rewatch the movie and look at this, see what that makes you do as in the audience. But that's all we all had time for. Jac'Quon, before we sign off, I wanted you, if you have anything where people could point to your art or past recordings of some of your work that if they wanted to check it out that you knew of or you would point people to.
Oh no. Oh man.
He will after today.
So I haven't done anything in a couple years. It's been some time since I've done some stuff. Most of the stuff that I have that's recorded is probably from high school, and it's not my best work, man.
I feel you.
I'll do some new stuff, and then we can bring that up.
All right, that's awesome. We gotta have you back on another episode. That's awesome. I don't think there's any other updates from us. I think the only other one would be parablearrows.com. We have some of the original fiction that's on there and some blog posts that we're going to start writing. So when we don't have a full episode on it, you can still hear some of our thoughts in between. I can say that my writings are not going to be the absolute what I would have if I had no other full-time job, but they're going to be the things that I can put together to really help hopefully think and see the value in those movies. Josh, I don't know if you're going to be writing any essays coming up soon or things you're thinking of.
My goal is to have a draft of a book done by May. So it's coming. It's actually, it's outlined and everything. So now I just need to write it. So we might have something at the end of the year. So we'll,
awesome.
Maybe some sneak peeks in a little bit.
Well, awesome. Everybody, we really appreciate you listening. We know these episodes can be long, but we're hoping that you're thinking through it and enjoying and hopefully having some people you can talk about these things with. So thanks. That's all we have time for the main episode today. Thanks for the support. Peace. This episode was produced by Josh Erickson, Josh Cook, and Femi Shokoya, and edited by Josh Erickson. Our social media producer is Colton Mefford. We are currently self-supported. You can check out short stories, merch, and highlighted creators at parablearrows.com. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Parable Arrows or support us on Patreon. Thank you for listening to the Parable Arrows podcast. Think, move in faithfulness, and trust God. Pull back, aim high, let it fly.